Imagine for a second two people. The first one is a farmer in the Middle Ages. He's living together with his family in a small, damp, dirty hut. He's having a tough life working in the fields, trying to keep himself alive and feed his 5 children and his wife. The second person is living in our day and age. He's working as a successful Wall Street banker and owns a penthouse with a gorgeous view on Central Park. The question now is, which of those two men is happier? You might think that it is obviously the modern age Wall Street banker, but actually it's not that easy. Which is why the question of happiness throughout history became interesting to one of the most popular historians of our times, Yuval Noah Harari. Yuval is a professor of history in Israel and on top of that has written 3 books by now, all of which became international bestsellers. And in his first book, Sapiens, he discusses the question of what actually makes mankind happy and whether or not we have been getting closer towards a life of well-being and life satisfaction throughout the centuries. Yuval says that happiness is a topic that has been completely neglected by historians up until now, which, if you think about it, is a real pity, because what more do we desire in life than happiness? If all the advancements in our life over the course of the last couple of thousands of years have not led to us being more happy, then what really is the point of all this? You could make a very solid point that hunter and gatherers in the Stone Age were more happy in life than farmers, and farmers in turn were more satisfied with their life than factory workers in the 19th century. As Harari says in his book, the transition first to agriculture and then to industry has condemned us to living unnatural lives that cannot give full expression to our inherent inclinations and instincts, and therefore cannot satisfy our deepest yearnings. So with that in mind, is it actually possible that we have exerted so much energy into improving our living conditions when in fact this has not improved our life satisfaction at all? To figure out if our ancestors actually lived a happier life, Noah Harari says we need to keep in mind 3 things. And the first one is that happiness is subjective. It is absolutely no question that we live in a time where we objectively have more material wealth than any generation in history before us. Maybe unfortunately though, this is not really relevant for our happiness. Happiness turns out to be a very subjective feeling, so it is much more based on what the other people around us have than what we objectively own. So when we think back to the example at the beginning, the farmer in the Middle Ages compares himself to his neighbors, and since they are all just as poor as he is, he does not really feel like he's missing out on anything in life. Our modern age millionaire banker, however, tends to compare himself to people who are living an even more luxurious life in New York than he is. He knows people who are billionaires, he knows people who own islands and yachts, while he only owns this apartment overlooking Central Park. So coming from that perspective, he actually feels belittled and feels like other people are getting ahead of him in life. We run into the same issue of subjectivity when we try to put ourselves into the shoes of people who lived in the past. Yes, peasants in the Middle Ages were oftentimes dirt poor, starving, and couldn't even keep themselves clean, but this is only an issue if you look at it from our perspective. If you instead take the viewpoint of somebody else living in the Middle Ages, then this is just normal life. So make sure to keep that in mind when you're talking about happiness throughout history. The second very important point that Noah Harari makes is that happiness relies on biology. Living in a democracy, winning the lottery, or driving a sports car is not what makes us happy. What makes us happy are the brain chemicals that are responsible for happiness. So throughout history, humans have relied on oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin to generate happiness in their bodies. And the thing about those chemicals is that they usually can't exceed a certain threshold. So that means that the farmer in the Middle Ages who moves into his tiny little mud hut is just as happy as the Wall Street banker who moves into his penthouse, simply because it releases the exact same amount of oxytocin and serotonin and dopamine. When you think about happiness from a purely biological perspective, it really makes more sense to focus on your brain chemicals than on turning over governments, changing political systems, and fostering economic growth. And this is true even more so because those happiness chemicals in our brains always return to their base level after a certain period of excitement. Even if you manage to somehow get happier than you normally feel in your day-to-day life, soon your happiness will come back to its normal levels. If this is all true, then what's the solution here? What does Noah Harari suggest we should do in order to become happier and more well-rounded human beings in our modern day and age? Well, this is actually his third main point on happiness. Try to learn to detach yourself from your feelings. And with that he means both your good feelings and your bad feelings. Noah Harari seems to be a big fan of Buddhism exactly because they focus on detachment from your emotions. And in fact, he says that this is something that we often get wrong in our understanding of Buddhism, especially here in the Western world. Buddhism is not just about detaching yourself from materialism and all the external pleasures that we can experience in life. Instead, it is also about detaching yourself even from positive internal emotions. So Harari says that happiness is not found by searching internally for those happy emotions, but instead by learning that we are not our emotions at all, neither good nor bad. That, he says, is what the Buddha was teaching back in the days and what Buddhism has been practicing for thousands of years now. And according to Noah Harari, this is something we could all benefit from in our 21st century life. And I personally find that really good advice. My takeaway from Harari's lesson on happiness and history is that we nowadays live in a time of unprecedented surplus. On top of that, we have globalization and the internet, so we are always aware of what is happening in the rest of the world and how well off other people are. So that means that even though we have more than ever before, we feel more unsatisfied than ever before, because we are constantly comparing ourselves and we could constantly accumulate more. There's never a limit. In order to not feel drained, exhausted and unhappy, we have to teach ourselves how to detach from our own emotions. Yes, we are all living together in this crazy modern world, but we can learn how we can emotionally detach from that. And if we can learn to do that, we can enjoy all the pleasures of modern life without actually relying on them for feeling happy. I do hope that this video was helpful to you, and if it was, feel free to subscribe down below for more videos about happiness and life satisfaction. I will see you guys in the next video.